So everything involves race
Yeah.
for a person who deals with racism. That's my response to everybody who, the only person who thinks that race is not involved in any topic is the person who is part of a dominating race.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I use dominating instead of dominant very intentionally. I
Oh
don't think
yeah.
there's anything dominant about being white or whiteness.
Yeah.
Like, but the difference between like being dominant as if it's inherent and you have a right to it versus dominating, which is like
Exactly.
literally lording over someone in violence. Like, yes, you're
Exactly.
part of a dominating race. Who bullies people? Of course you don't think race has anything to do with this. And then usually I just leave it and like let people flounder and like try to explain themselves. But like the shorthand is race is involved in everything, just like gender is. Just like because everything that affects people's perception of you, everything that triggers stereotypes in someone's mind as soon as they hear you or see you is going to affect both how you're perceived and how you were treated. And that in turn, the blowback of that affects our capacity to see ourselves and how we identify and how we see our own identities. There's never a context where race is not relevant. There's never a context where race is not relevant, period. And people who think that there is not do not have to live with the effects of being ostracized for their race, bar none. Like that's what it is. Obviously we all know people who, and like I love your page because you're constantly pointing this out and I appreciate that, but like we all know people who are trying desperately to pretend that they are not part of our race, and I just feel like those are our own right. That's a different conversation. That's like an internal conversation ethnically, but I think that those are manifestations of delusion, like that's just unfortunately some people's trauma with racism and with prejudice plays out in such a way that the only way that they have foreseen to attempt to escape it is to espouse. It's very much like if you can't beat them, join them,
Yeah. Yeah.
And in a spirit of compassion, like although it makes me irate to watch people do that because of the effect that it has on the rest of us, I try to tell myself like it's coming from a place of extraordinary pain.
Hmm.
Because when you get down to it, like I'm going to use Candace Owens as an example. And I was going to say, I hope she doesn't hear this, but maybe I hope she does. I have no idea. It depends. Depends on how it's going to affect her. Candace Owens, it came to light that she had an extraordinarily, I'm sure that wasn't the first traumatic like incident that she dealt with, but like a very public um, lawsuit, right? Like where she was trying to get support for some extreme discrimination. And instead of moving towards advocacy, whatever happened to her in that process moved her to a place that she wanted to join people in denying her own mistreatment because for her, that was a survival tactic to escape the pain.
Hmm.
And I think what are we talking about? We're talking about neurodivergence. Yeah, I think that within our own communities, because I don't care what white people think about like how race applies to the rest of us. I really don't. Like I just want to throw a history book at them and like leave it alone. But within our own communities, when we hear people say these things, when we hear people try to separate the experience of ability in any way, shape, or form, any kind of ableism from the cross sectionality of racism, I think we need to whoever is closest to them and has the capacity sort of needs to have an intervention for lack of a better word and be like what got you to the place that made you believe that this integral part of your history and your identity is irrelevant to your current experiences. And I've never seen I've been in a lot of interesting advocacy situations over the last 14 years, and I've never seen someone challenge, like who was Black, Asian, Hispanic, Indigenous, anything, where another person from their own culture looked at them and says, what happened to you that made you think you being an Asian woman or an Indigenous man or a Black, whatever, what happened to you that made you think that that wasn't an important part of your identity that did not get to them? I've never seen a situation where somebody was called out straight on that it wasn't very obvious that that was just a cover up for unresolved pain. You know what I mean? So if it's within our communities, if it's within a social group of color where it is a person who clearly like shares our identity, whether they believe it or not, is trying to spout this idea that they can separate the experience of neurodivergence or any sort of disability or different ability, however you want to look at it, from experiencing racism. That's what I do. I just challenge it head on. And it's very, instead of arguing with them, like, let's get to the bottom of it. Why do you think that your identity doesn't matter? And you have to personalize it, right? Because like they're trying to depersonalize everything. They're trying to distance themselves from the effects, from the identity, from, you know, the identification, from their being able to relate to you and your experiences by sharing an identity with you. If you personalize it and say, why do you think, like, God forbid you said something like that, I would ask you, like, what about your life has taught you that you being Asian, I don't know, do you identify as Asian? I've actually never seen you do that. Okay. Yeah. And what I would ask you, like, what about you has taught you that being Filipino was worthless? And I usually use really like deep cutting, right? Like, how do you feel when somebody says that to you? Hold on a minute. Yeah. And I most people have been struggling with the idea of their ethnic identity being worthless or being dangerous. And so when you point it out and you challenge them with it, inevitably you will get somewhere. I'm not suggesting it'll be peaceful in the meantime, but sometimes you need that level of confrontation when people are distancing themselves that far from reality. So I tend to be a little bit radical with most things. If it's a white person, I'm just going to go straight for that. And if it's a person of color, I'm going to ask them, like, what's happened to you? The reason why you don't think your ethnicity matters.
I love that question because, you know, I always hate when, you know, people ask these disingenuous questions because it's clear that they don't want to engage on the subject of race because they don't have the like the actual experience or the knowledge or the ability to confidently talk about it. So they try to, like you said, they try to depersonalize it. They try to make it, you know, they try to put these ideas into this, you know, debate arena where, you know, we can just talk about these fun ideas as if they're not actually impacting real people. And so, you know, I love that you instead are just like going for the gut and saying, okay, well, why, like, why are you this way? Because it really does expose, you know, like what are the gears going on that have caused this belief to manifest? Because sometimes they just say it as if it's like, well, this is the natural position. It's like, well, no.
You're like, no, this is your natural position.
Exactly.
Like, so explain yourself, because the rest of us don't agree with that. So where are you coming from on this, right? Exactly. Instead of generalizing your personal experience, let's personalize your general experience. You can explain why you feel that way.
And it always gets them.
It does. It always gets somewhere.